or good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank you all for being here this afternoon. My name is Jennifer Hassell. I'm the Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure to introduce this evening's or this afternoon's event. We are presenting some historical information about General Lafayette. For those of you that have watched Hamilton, you might know of General Lafayette, and if not, you're going to learn about him this evening, or this afternoon. And this is a good lead into the event that we'll be hosting on August 31st, and that is the reenactment of the speech of General Lafayette, which took place here in Chelsea, which is part of Chelsea's history. This year we're celebrating the 400th anniversary of Chelsea, which is a huge thing to be proud of. And as we enter into next year, we're going to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Chelsea Creek. And we have so many more other events that in store coming up towards the end of this year and the beginning of next year. Without further ado, I really would like to take this opportunity to introduce Peter Riley.
That's correct.
And Evie Price. Okay. They are here in authentic attire from that era, and they're here to speak and answer any questions we have pertaining to General Lafayette. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
President Monroe invited Lafayette to come visit the United States. He thought it would be a kind of a boost to the people's morale. The United States was, a self-governing republic, and that was a rare thing at that time. And in many quarters, it wasn't that popular. Monroe had just come out with the Monroe Doctrine, more or less telling the European powers that to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. And there was a lot of, many of the, in South America, there were Republican movements rising up against Spanish rule. So it was a tense period. It was also a tense period in terms of the upcoming election in 1824, because it would be the first time that the president wouldn't be one of the founding fathers, because they were all too old. And Lafayette was considered by many, as we'll get into, just a notch below Washington in terms of our founding fathers, and he had a tremendous advantage because he had not been involved in American politics other than helping get us free from the British, and he was involved in many other democratic things, but he didn't have any, and he's not associated with any region of the country. So he's kind of almost a pure American hero, even though he's French. So he's the surviving Major General of George Washington's circle. He was a Major General when he was 19 years old. Now he's older. I'll tell you what happened in Quincy just briefly, and then we'll get into the rest of it. Lafayette arrived in Manhattan on a tremendous reception on August 16th. More people came out for Lafayette than came out for the Beatles. He comes to Massachusetts arriving on August 23rd, and he spends a little more than a week in the neighborhood of Boston. Does a lot of different things. But he made a commitment to visit Portsmouth, and so arrangements were made for him so that he could go up to Portsmouth, come back down to Boston, and take off on September 2nd to get back to New York by September 6th, which was his birthday. It was his 67th birthday. He was being recognized by the League of Cincinnati. Mayor Quincy of Boston made all the arrangements. So on August 31st, Lafayette has to get to Newburyport, where he's going to spend the night, so he can get to Portsmouth the next day. But he has to stop everywhere. you can't go through a town and not be honored. And Chelsea is kind of the first stop on the morning of August 31st. And I think the weather hadn't gotten bad yet. It was going to be tremendous rain. But when Lafayette arrived at the high ground at Chelsea, he was met by the whole population of the village. A salute of artillery honored his arrival. The Mechanic Light Infantry Company of Salem was there to honor him. And Reverend Joseph Tuckerman of the First Church of Chelsea, Mass. Addressed him. And I'm not going to give you that address now because that's for the big event. Somebody else will be giving you. But Reverend Joseph Tuckerman, 1778 to 1840, graduated from Harvard in 1798. And he was in the same class as William Ellery Channing, which, if you're into Unitarian Universalist history, you know who that was, but otherwise maybe not so much. After his ministry in Chelsea, he founded a kind of social work type of thing to help the poor with more enlightened attitudes, like that alcoholism isn't a sin, it's kind of a disease, and it was a very powerful movement which still exists to this day under the Unitarian Universalist Association. So Tuckerman is actually famous. So I'm going to get I'm going to get into the main talk now, which is about the meaning of the tour, the significance, and trying to put it in modern terms, so we as modern people can somehow understand this. On July 25th, 1824, Salem Town Jr. of Charlton, Mass. wrote to his wife about the expected reception of Lafayette in Boston. He wrote, "There never was, nor will be, such a meeting in this or any country." And there's actually some truth to that, even though it sounds like somebody exaggerated a little bit. Reflecting on the tour a few years later, Edward Everett wrote that it was an event taken in all its parts, unparalleled in the history of man. Hezekiah Niles wrote, "The volumes of history furnish no parallel. No one like Lafayette has ever reappeared in any country." And there's definitely some truth to that. So go ahead. When word of Lafayette's visit came out, Mayor Quincy of Boston wrote to Lafayette inviting him to come to Boston. Lafayette responded, "Whatever port I first attain, I shall with the same eagerness hasten to Boston and present its beloved inhabitants as I have the honor to offer it to the City Council and to you, sir, with homage of my affectionate gratitude." And Lafayette followed through on that promise, crossing the border between Rhode Island and Massachusetts on August 23rd, a week after he landed in Manhattan. He spent the night in Roxbury and the next day was paraded to the State House. Mayor Quincy addressed him at the city line. Roxbury wasn't part of Boston at that point. "When urged by generous sympathy, you first landed on these shores, you found a people engaged in an arduous and eventful struggle for liberty with apparently inadequate means and amidst dubious omens. After the lapse of nearly half a century, you find the same people, prosperous beyond all hope and all precedent, their liberty secure, sitting in its strength, without fear and without reproach. In your youth, you joined the standard of 3 millions of people raised in an unequal and uncertain conflict. In your advanced age, you return and are met by 10 millions of people, their descendants, whose hearts throng hither to greet your approach and to rejoice in it. This is not the movement of a turbulent populace excited by fresh laurels or of some recent conqueror. It is a grave, moral, intellectual impulse." This is pretty typical of the speech that he will get wherever he goes. Now, it's worth pausing here a moment to consider at what the state of the world might have appeared to someone involved in the celebration of Lafayette. Somebody who read the newspapers, kind of kept up with current events. Consider the foreign news section of the Recorder in Greenfield, Mass. On August 17, 1824. Go ahead. We get a summary of what the New York papers have printed from the English and French papers up to June 26th. So information moves at the same rate that people move, and people don't move nearly as fast as they will be moving before long. But it's, a month more or less. As Ferdinand VII, there was a report that one of the independent governments in South America is seeking to buy vessels of war in order that they might place their navy on an equal footing with that of Spain. In Spain itself, a decree of amnesty appears to be mere mockery. More French troops were pouring into the country. So Ferdinand VII was a constitutional monarch because of Napoleon. To simplify things, and in France you have Louis XVIII, who is kind of an absolute monarch, and wants to be more of an absolute monarch, and wants to back the other guys who also want to be absolute. So that's why French troops are pouring into Spain. There are stories about the fighting for Greek independence. Go ahead. Lord Byron had been using his financial resources to aid the revolution against the Ottomans, and he had died there in April. Go ahead. An 18-year-old lad in Nantucket would stand in the pouring rain on August 31st, waiting to shake hands with Lafayette. Pondering his career choices, he wavered between trying to get into West Point or following Lord Byron's example and fighting for liberty in Greece. Instead, William Lloyd Garrison would found a newspaper called The Liberator in 1831 and helped found the American Anti-Slavery Society. Garrison is probably the most famous white abolitionist. Obviously, somebody like Frederick Douglass is more famous than he is, and actually he and Frederick Douglass were friends and not so much friends after a while. But he's a very significant figure. Now, to understand the full context of Lafayette's life, you would have to have deeper knowledge of American French and general European history than I can ever hope for. But here is how I will sum it up. Lafayette was close to universally popular in the United States, not only because of how he helped us win the Revolution, but also because of what he does after. People in the United States follow his post-American Revolution career. So he's universally popular in the United States. In Europe, not so much. Here is an example of someone who did not like Lafayette. Clemens von Metternich. Henry Kissinger was a big fan of his. But Metternich's idea was to make the world safe through absolute monarchy. He was the foreign minister or chancellor of Austria, and he did all this diplomatic maneuvering. And to be fair, the Napoleonic War, the wars that broke out from the French Revolution and then Napoleon were really horrible. So wanting to just calm people down has, you can't complain about it too much. At any rate, his diary entry on May 28, 1834, which was about when Lafayette died, was, "Lafayette is dead, too late for the world. I am disgusted to see the Montier pronounces a eulogy over him." Also, Metternich had called the Monroe Doctrine an indecent declaration. There's also news that Lafayette will be taking passage to the United States on July 10th. And go ahead. Elsewhere in the paper, a note that how many of many of our public prints still style him the Marquis Lafayette, and you'll see that a lot to this day. But he had actually renounced the title of Marquis because that was something inherited. He didn't earn that type of stuff, so he just wanted to be known as General because that was a thing. And you will find in the contemporary accounts in 1824, 1825, that's how he's generally referred to as General Lafayette or the General. Now, well-informed Americans would be aware of the perilous state of government by the people in the world. It was struggling. It was going up and it was going down. As Sarah Val wrote, and this is a great book. It's Sarah Val, Lafayette in the Somewhat United States. It's a reflection on the tour and Lafayette, but it alternates between the present and the past, how people understand it now and how people understand it then, and what's going on currently and how it's reflected. I really recommend it. Sarah Val wrote, more than anyone else on earth, Lafayette was mournfully aware of the uniqueness of the American Republic he had fought to build. Okay, so people are expecting to see Lafayette. They're expecting to see that, in their mind maybe is that young, dashing Marquis. And this is one of the more common portraits of Lafayette that you'll see. The young Marquis, 19 years old, but that's not what they got. This is what they got. He's gonna turn 67 and get to 68 while he's here. He has a cane there. He walks with a limp, and people would tend to think maybe he let him think that was from his wound in the Battle of Brandywine, but actually it was falling on the ice in Paris in like 1809 or something like that. The red hair is a hairpiece, and he's pretty hefty guy. The general will be in civilian clothes and quite a bit older. Now, we Lafayette enthusiasts, go ahead. We like to compare the farewell tour to, we compare him to a rock star, okay? And you'll see that T-shirt with the guitar and a very partial list of the stops on the tour. That's the metaphor that's used by a lot of the enthusiasts, and it has some merit. Like he comes into New York, and which didn't have as many people living in New York as it did in the 60s and 1960s, but more people come out for him than come out for the Beatles. Now there are two problems with the Rockstar metaphor. The first is that when Lafayette arrives in any place where he's going to be greeted, he doesn't put on a show. The community puts on a show for Lafayette. They want to show how grateful they are to him. So they'll have a prominent speaker like Mayor Quincy at the city line who will talk about that, how significant they feel he is. It's quite common to say, just a little niche below Washington, and of course you feel the same way because you really loved Washington so much, and they'll then they'll show off how much our population has increased, how much things have improved, and this is due to this wonderful form of government that you helped us establish. And then the militia will be there, and they'll show off, and the ladies they'll be doing all sorts of things to interest them. There's a great book that one of the AFL members wrote called "A Bus from Lafayette," and it's kind of a middle school fiction about a young girl who gets kissed on the cheek by Lafayette, and that's kind of a life-changing moment for her. But after the big speech from the most eminent person available, he said a few words of thanks, shook hands, and reminisced with the veterans. And very important part of of Lafayette's reception was to also honor the still surviving veterans of the American Revolution. And they were on average, actually on average, a tad younger than contemporary Vietnam veterans. So there'd be a bunch of these old vets getting around, and he'd always remember them. You know, if somebody was in his light infantry, he'd say, "Oh yeah, I remember you." Then he'd kiss the ladies on the hand and the cheek, and he'd tell the militia he'd never seen finer troops anywhere. So, now the second problem with the Rockstar metaphor is that it's inadequate. In Lynn, Mass, on August 31st, which is right after Chelsea Lynn, right? That's it. Which is the next stop in 1824. Not in 2024 though. The schedule is so busy on August 31st, 1824, that we had to split it up. And so Lynn and Newburyport are on the previous day, on August 30th. Jonathan White, chairman of the Committee of Arrangements, speaks and says, "Although your present appearance among us, like the transit of a brilliant and beneficent planet, commissioned to proclaim goodwill to man in its rapid career among innumerable worlds, is short and fleeting, the emanations of the bright and joyous light which is shed around you will continue with us to guide our steps and cheer our hearts to the latest moment of our existence." Again, very poetic, sounds like an exaggeration, but you can read obituaries in 1890 of some very old person who led a very full life with all sorts of significant achievements. But one of the high points of that life will be he shook hands with Lafayette when he was 7 years old. So that'll be a thing. Plus, there's a tremendous number of places named after Lafayette, and it's really amazing. When during World War I, volunteers went to fly for France, and they called themselves the Lafayette Escadrille. And when American troops arrived in France in 1917, they went to, they had a ceremony at Lafayette's grave in Paris, which has soil from Bunker Hill covering him. I'm sorry, I don't have the guy's name. It's often attributed to Persian, but it was actually a colonel. I think his name was Stanton or something like that. He stands there and says, "Lafayette, we are here," and it's to represent the kind of payback to France for having saved us in the Revolution. Um, the banner in Lynn that day went even further. Thou gavest to us 13 talents. Lo, we have gained 11 more. Receive our gratitude. You got to have a little Bible knowledge to get that one. I'll explain it later. But so they're saying it's like you gave us our original thing. It was you. Salem had one of the more distinguished speakers on that rainy day in August. It started raining after Chelsea. It was raining tremendously. Joseph Story had been on the United States Supreme Court since 1811. In 1841, he would write the opinion in the United States versus Amistad, which would free 53 Africans who had rose up to take over the ship where they were being illegally transported in. He summarized Lafayette's contribution in this way: can we forget that we were poor and struggling, alone in the doubtful contest for independence, and you crossed the Atlantic at the hazard of fortune and fame to cheer us in our resistance, that you recrossed it to solicit naval and military succors from the throne of France, and returned with triumphant success, that your gallantry in the Southern campaign checked the inroads of a brave and confident enemy, that your military labors closed but with the surrender at Yorktown, and thus indissolubly united your name with the proud events of that glorious day. Lafayette was not a rock star. He was a superhero. That's how he's being received in the United States, as a superhero. He saved us, and then he went off to another planet to do all sorts of other things, got into difficulties, and now he's coming back for a visit, and he didn't have to do anything. He just has to be there. Now, this is a 21st century metaphor I'm using, and so every superhero has an origin story. So we're going to give you the origin story of Lafayette the superhero. Go ahead. I'm drawing heavily, although I've read a lot of other things, but Hero of Two Worlds by Mike Duncan is a really good biography that came out relatively recently. He's still going around talking about it. So, yeah. Oh, geez, I need to fix that. That should be a C, not an X. Got to fix that one. Marie Joseph Paul Yves Roche Gilbert du Matière de Lafayette was born in 1757. I'm never going to be able to memorize that name. As a youngster, he went by Gilbert. He spent his early years in Chalvinac, far from the center of power in Versailles and Paris. Since I'm terrible at French pronunciation, and this is a superhero narrative inspired by a true story, we will call it Smallville. His father died in the Battle of Minden in 1759, making Gilbert the Marquis. That's 1759, that's the 7 Years' War, which we call the French and Indian War. I have a different name for it in Quebec. But at any rate, so his father died when he was like 2 years old. So his father's family were relatively poor sword nobles. There's two big classes of nobility. One is the sword nobles, who you've got to have the line of ancestors to be part of them, and you'll end up, if you're going to do anything, it'll probably be military. The nobility of the robe, you could actually buy into that, and then you become a judge or something like that, and that's kind of not nearly as cool. But and Lafayette's ancestors go back to somebody who was with Joan of Arc. However, Lafayette's family is not one of the really high-level families that you'll find in Paris and Versailles. His mother, though, is from that sort of family. Marie-Louise Jolet de la Ravière. She's from that type of family. The problem you have when you have daughters is you've got to provide dowries. So that would account for her marrying somebody who's not quite at the same level. But then what he would get out of that was it would help his career, because this is not a meritocracy by any stretch of the imagination. It's all about influence, totally, and people don't think that's a bad thing. So his mother leaves him with his grandmother and a couple of aunts in Chauvignac, and she goes to live with her grandfather in Paris. So she's going to be starting to pave the way for his future career. Meanwhile, his grandmother is running the show. So she's living in Metropolis. He's in Smallville. She's living in Metropolis. Gilbert, though, was very happy being the young lord of the manor. He's a little kid. He's walking around. Everybody doffs their cap because he's the marquis. His grandmother's running things, but he's it. He takes the military heritage of the family to heart. Lafayette's father getting killed in battle was not an unusual thing in his family. It's almost like that's the way they were. And Lafayette said, "I can recall no time in my life when I did not love stories of glorious deeds or have dreams of traveling the world in search of fame." During this period, when he's growing up, the general region around where he lives, a pretty large area, is being terrorized by a strange beast, and there was a real thing. They found it eventually and killed it, but nobody quite figured out what it was. It's like one thing. It's like it's a cross between a wolf and a lion, or something like that. But it was a lot. It killed a lot of people, and it was referred to as the Beast of Gevaudan. So Lafayette, is the Marquis, and he's responsible for protecting his people. So when he's 8 years old, he spent many hours out in the forest looking for the Beast of Gevaudan, and we're lucky he didn't find it. But in 1768, so he's like 11, Gilbert gets the summons to go to Paris, and his carefree life as little lord of the manor was over. In Paris, not adapted to court life and still dreaming of an active military career, he was a bit out of place. Less than 2 years later, though, he receives his first superpower. In the month of April 1770, both his mother and his maternal grandfather died. So he's 13 or so. Lafayette is now one of the wealthiest aristocrats in Europe and the hottest commodity on the marriage market. Because here's somebody who's very rich, but not tremendously influential. So this is a great deal. That's his mother-in-law, and as you can see, she dies in 1794, along with several other relatives who are beheaded in the Terror. the father, Jean-Paul Francois de Noailles, Duc de Allen, Marie, go ahead, Adrian. Decides that this will be a good husband for his 12-year-old daughter, because Lafayette is so rich, he doesn't need very big dowry, but he'll get a lot of influence. He'll get a lot of influence by being part of this family, and Lafayette's family has dwindled so much that he'll pretty much be absorbed into this guy's family. So it's a win-win, because he can get Lafayette all these great positions that will advance his career. His mother is a very pious woman and isn't that enthusiastic about this idea. But 14-year-old Lafayette moves to Versailles to live with his future in-laws. At first, Adrian does not know that they are engaged. 12-year-old Adrian is just told to be nice to the orphan boy that her old man has taken an interest in. And as it happens, she falls very much in love with him, and they have a very loving marriage. Lafayette still has affairs because that's what you're supposed to do, but you know, it's a very thing. And he's devastated when she dies in 1807, and she'll be buried in the same cemetery as her mother and her I think at least one aunt, and it's a cemetery that was created to kind of parcel out the people who were buried in mass graves who've been executed. They created this cemetery in Paris, and that's where her mother is. So that's where she's buried, and that's where Lafayette is buried, in a grave with soil from Bunker Hill, where at least since 1917 the American flag has flown continuously. It's replaced every year. It actually, and it was somehow or other, even while Paris was occupied in World War II, the American flag stayed there. So Lafayette he's really prestigious now, moving into higher circles. He moves to Versailles, but he doesn't fit in. He wants an active military career. He doesn't dance very well. Marie Antoinette makes fun of how he's dancing. He doesn't know all the cool ways you're supposed to walk. It's just not him. So that's one problem he has. And the other thing is this odd thing about the education of the French elite. They study these stories about Greek democracy and the Roman Republic, and about how wonderful those things were hypothetically, even though their job is to kind of suck up to an absolute monarch. And Lafayette will have as his high school buds three kings of France. There's Louis XVI, who's just a little older than him, and Louis XVIII, and Charles X, who's born the same year as he is. They'll all regret knowing him, all of them. And so, in that atmosphere then of these, and along with these Enlightenment ideas, all of a sudden there's all these stories about these Americans who govern themselves, and it's the people that take care of them things. And now they're having this war with the British, who killed his old man. So he is very enthusiastic about the idea of going to America, just like William Lloyd Garrison thought about going to Greece, and Lord Byron actually went to Greece, and it's a big thing. And Louis XVI, who's the king, and now his father just died, says, no, you can't do that. We got all these negotiations going on, and it would embarrass us. And his father-in-law is like, no. And so the American Celestine, who recruits Lafayette, and he also Celestine recruited a lot of duds also. But he's saying, well, we can make you a major general, but we can't help you get there or anything like that. But Lafayette has a superpower. He's one of the wealthiest aristocrats in Europe. He buys a ship for himself and a bunch of associates who want to go there. And so he buys his own ship and comes to America. He arrives in South Carolina, and there's a whole drama. He has to get up to Philadelphia, and when he gets to Philadelphia, he finds that the Americans are sick of all these foreign officers coming here. You know, they make these huge demands. They won't bother to learn to speak English. They're kind of contemptuous, and it's annoying. So they just give an eye. However, that's where the other superpower comes in. Because of his marriage, he's so well connected, and people like Benjamin Franklin are aware of this. So Congress says, well, okay, we're going to make you a major general, and they send him to Washington, and they pretty much tell Washington, be nice to this kid, he's going to really helpful, and try not to get him killed. So Washington says to Lafayette, it's like, well, you'll be part of my official family. And that just gets Lafayette, and Lafayette is very humble. And so part of the dynamic is that Lafayette's father was killed, and he was raised, when he was young, he was raised by women, probably formidable women, but still he doesn't have a father, and Washington never had his own son. And so there's this father-son relationship that's created between Lafayette and Washington. Lafayette's disappointed that he doesn't get a command of the division right away, but he's humble. What happens is at the Battle of Brandywine, there's troops are panicking. There's a screw up. It's an American loss, but Lafayette manages to rally troops to hold the line. And he's wounded. He keeps going while he's wounded, and he really distinguishes himself. And he becomes an effective combat leader. And Washington starts relying on him. He will then go, he will go back to France. France finally comes around and decides that it's going to seriously support the United States. Lafayette returns to France in the uniform of a major general in the United States Army, even though he's also in the French, he's also in the French military, and speaks about why it's so important to help America, and it happens. France provides tremendous support, troops, equipment, and its navy, which is critical to the victory at Yorktown. And at Yorktown, there's a major naval battle which prevents Cornwallis from being able to be evacuated by sea. He's surrounded by troops, probably more French troops than American troops, but Lafayette is there in command of an American division, which includes Alexander Hamilton, and they're critical in the final victory at Yorktown. There we have it, and we get confused as to which one's Lafayette. The guy with his hand out, one of the two guys behind him. I'll have to clarify that. And in a mild but memorable display of his superpower, when he led Light Infantry Division, he didn't just command it, he helped equip it. He bought swords for all the NCOs. And those are still around as they were cherished. Although there's this amusing story, Daniel Shays. Anybody heard of him? Shays Rebellion, yeah. So Daniel Shea sold his sword that he'd gotten from Lafayette, and people really resented him for that. While Lafayette is, we'll go through. What happens to Lafayette after the revolution? We just can highlight when the French Revolution starts out, because Louis XVI has to call a parliament because he's broke, and some of that is to do with all the money they spent on the American Revolution, and the parliament ends up getting kind of uppity, and Lafayette is part of that, and they stormed. The Bastille is stormed. I'm not going to try and explain the French Revolution. I'm sorry, but one of Lafayette's contributions is that he collaborates with Thomas Jefferson. Is the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, which is still part of the French Constitution, and it's actually a little more elaborate than our Bill of Rights. Go ahead. So Lafayette is when the revolution breaks out, and now you kind of have this government that keeps changing in charge. The rest of Europe is the rest of the crown heads of Europe are really concerned, and France is being attacked from all sides. Lafayette is a very prominent military figure in France. So initially they put him in charge of this thing called the Garde Nationale, which is a neutral force to kind of keep order between the crowds and the royal troops. Because the crowds get acting up, the royal troops are just going to shoot them. So this Garde Nationale of kind of more middling people is formed. Lafayette's in command of that. And this creates one of the more interesting things. The militia in the United States, and all the states had it, all males of a certain age had to show up for militia duty unless they had some sort of exemption. And it's starting to be, some people took it real seriously and other people not so much. But the units could call themselves whatever they felt like. And when Lafayette came and visited, some of the militia units called themselves the National Guard, kind of in honor of Lafayette and what was going on in Paris. And this slowly caught on. So by the end of the 19th century, almost everybody called their militia the National Guard, and that's what we still call it, because the National Guard is the successor. They're units that are under the command of the governor of the state until something happens, and it's a lot better. It's a lot more organized now than it was then. But that National Guard it's because of Lafayette. Kind of in conclusion, there's two things. I'm sorry. So Lafayette is up on the line fighting the invasions, and the guys in Paris say, "Why don't you come back?" And he says, "Oh yeah, why don't I come back so you can behead me like you beheaded my mother-in-law?" So he takes off, and he's captured by the Austrians, and of course they're mad at him because he was opposed to the king. So he ends up being imprisoned for many years. It's like five years. And Adrienne begs to be able to visit him and goes to Austria, and the people say, "Well, yeah, you can visit him, but if you go in, you're not coming out." And so she ends up, she and her two daughters end up being in prison with him. And there's a lot of romance about his imprisonment. George Washington, his son, who's named George Washington Lafayette, is staying with George Washington. He's essentially he's freed by Napoleon, and he lays low for a long time, but then after the restoration of the Bourbons, he's starting to become more politically active, and that's it's not such a bad idea for him to be out of France for the time that he was out of France. So I've got something. I've got two more things for you to kind of summarize this. This is from Sarah Val. She wrote, "The thing that drew me to Lafayette as a subject, that he was that rare object of agreement in the ironically named United States, kept me coming back to why that made him unique. Namely, that we the people have never agreed on much of anything. Other than a bipartisan consensus on barbecue and Meryl Streep, plus that time in 1942 when everyone from Bing Crosby to Oregonian school children heeded FDR's call to scrounge up rubber for the war effort, disunity is the through line of the national plot. Not necessarily as a failing, but as a free people's privilege. And thanks to Lafayette and his cohorts in Washington's army, plus the King of France and his navy, not to mention the founding dreamers who clearly did not think through what happens every time one citizen's pursuit of happiness infuriates his neighbors, getting on each other's nerves is all right. And the election of 1824, we can start, was the first election in which it's not one of the founding fathers. Also, the two-party system that had kind of evolved, and it's very confusing because the founders didn't like political parties. They called them factions. They thought they were a bad idea. And the Electoral College, I believe, it was conceived of as more of a search committee, and it wasn't a problem because it was obvious that it was going to be George Washington. So, but after Washington decides that 2 terms is enough, the parties start forming. But the Federalist Party ends up kind of breaking apart. So the first two-party system has kind of crumbled by the time it's 1824, and the founders are all too old. So it's going to be a pretty bitter election. John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and William H. Crawford. I can never remember anything about this guy. At another presentation, I made a rude remark about John Calhoun, and it turned out one of his descendants was there. So, I won't do that again. So it was a very bitter election, but Lafayette's presence had a calming effect. Part of it was the newspapers. A typical newspaper is like 4 pages, and sometimes you can tell that they don't have enough content because they'll have these silly little blurbs in them. But they had a report on Lafayette continuously. It was like, where's Lafayette now? And that might have suppressed the vitriolic stories that would otherwise be going on. And it was, regardless of which candidate you supported, you thought Lafayette was great. And there was this competition to who can do the most stuff for Lafayette. So there was a calming effect. But there's this observation by Levasseur, who was Lafayette's secretary, and he wrote an account of the tour, which Alan Hoffman, who's the president of the American Friends of Lafayette, translated quite a few years ago, and it's in its 3rd printing. Levasseur had observed the way the election turned out was nobody won enough electoral college votes to have the presidency. The supporters of Henry Clay threw their support to John Quincy Adams, and that's how he won. Some people will say that Jackson won the popular vote, but you really can't say that because not all the states elected their electors. Some of them were selected by the state legislature still at that point. Regardless, there was a lot of grumbling by some of the Jacksonians, and there was actually a concern that there might be some sort of coup or something going on. And Lafayette was talking to one of the Jackson supporters about that, and you know, like what happened. You know, they said you guys were going to do something, and this was the response. We were indeed very busy shouting, but our adversaries did not take account of it, and they were right. They've judged us better than we would have wanted them to. Now that the law has spoken, we have only to obey it. We will second Adams with the same zeal as if we had supported him. But at the same time, we will shine a light on his administration, and according to whether it will be good or bad, we will defend it or attack it. Four years have passed very soon, and the consequences of a bad election are easy to repair. So, you know, there's thinking that some of that calming down was the result of Lafayette, and everybody celebrating and putting them in touch with the principles of the you know, that we choose to be governed by. So, anyway, any questions? No, I think we might have been in the wrong order. I read the Sarah Val thing, so maybe we got to shuffle the slides again. I hope that was coherent enough, and I'm happy to entertain any questions. Although the answer might be a dumb luck. So, you know, we're very excited. Chelsea is doing a great job in the event that's being planned. They're getting a lot of support from the city government, which is tremendous. I was telling her that's, you know, this is I haven't seen a you know, municipality or city be as supportive as it is in Chelsea. So it's really great. We're really excited about that, and we hope that you're going to be here and you can hear Reverend Tuckerman's words then. So I'll give you a peek if you're desperate to know. What? I got it here if you want to do it.
Peter, Evie, thank you so much.
Okay.
I just want to take this opportunity to introduce our city manager,
sure.
Fidel Montes. He is going to be our Tuckerman for the reenactment of Lafayette. So I want to take an opportunity to thank Fidel. And again, just give accolade to the city because without the city's support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Once again, I want to thank everyone for attending this event this evening. I hope you learned something about Lafayette, and I hope you're more excited about what's to come for August 31st. Thank you so much.